Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In this episode, member The Stranger explains why he has always been in a rush. From finishing college in just 20 months to landing a key internship before his MSF in order to position himself to break into investment banking, to prepping for Buyside interviews, he was always moving fast until the unexpected happened. Some great advice in this podcast on positioning yourself for your next career jump and life in general. Enjoy. The Stranger, thanks for joining the Wall Street Oasis podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So it'd be great if you could just give us a brief overview of your background.
Sure. So I did my undergraduate work at a top 50 public school in the Southeast. At the time, I thought I was going to be going to law school, and so took a year off to try and do that and wound up deciding finance was my stick. So did an MSF at a semi-target, after which I was able to successfully make it to a middle market investment banking firm. After spending about a year and 9 months there, I broke in to a large hedge fund of funds based in New York. And then after just under 2 years there, decided I wanted to get a little closer to the action and broke into VC, specifically at a healthcare-focused fund.
Very cool. Okay, so let's go back to undergrad. You said you wanted to go to law school, so you took some time off. What was the thinking there?
Yeah, I sort of just.
Are you crazy? Are you crazy? Going to law school? No, just kidding. Go ahead.
Yeah. No. I was always one of those kids, I guess, that was argumentative, and so for a long time was just told, sort of.
You have to be a lawyer.
Go be a lawyer. Go be a lawyer. Yeah, and then so and I've always been a little impatient, so I decided I would get done with my undergrad real quickly. So I graduated in like 20 months from start to finish.
Oh my gosh, that's intense.
And the game plan was, gonna study for the LSAT, and I'd taken an internship at the law school doing like stuff for one of the antitrust guys there, and realized like I liked the economic side of that way more than I liked parsing the legalese. So at that point, I said, okay, let me pump the brakes. I'm going to go spend a year. Had to work a really kind of dead-end kind of operations role at a small brokerage firm while I applied, and was lucky enough to get into the program that I did.
The banking program, you mean, or you mean the MSF program?
The MSF, MSF, yeah. So did a 1 year MSF. After which I broke into banking.
So you were in a rush. So you basically 20 months. That's crazy. First, you did 4 years of credits in 20 months.
Yeah, it was like looking back.
What's the rush? Do you want to enjoy your undergrad or no? What do you think? Was it financial? Was it something where like you didn't want to actually pay for 4 years, or is it like more? I assume it's more economical because you only have a couple of years of like housing costs and stuff.
Yeah, it was a confluence of factors. What I would say is, so I think the proximate thing, so again, I was convinced I was going to law school. And so to me, like this undergrad stuff was totally irrelevant, right? I was just kind of doing something so that I could meet the requirements for law school.
Got it.
So I had that bias. And then my parents are actually professors. And specifically my mother and stepfather were professors at the university I was at. And they were thinking about moving, which would have jeopardized the in-state tuition I qualified for there. I was looking at starting to pay Ivy League tuition for a state school.
Clock was ticking.
Like, no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was financial consideration there. That's why you were kind of pushing hard.
That was a big piece of it, yeah.
And just for the record, I'm not going to say what your GPA was, but it was pretty good considering you jammed so much in such a short time. But
yes, I like to think so.
Yeah. So you so you got into, you figured out, okay, wait a second, like the economic side more. Let me go get an MSF. The MSF is kind of an interesting degree. It's kind of, especially back when you got it, it was kind of new, right? I mean, what was the thought process around, or the research around that, and thinking, hey, this is a good step for me?
Yeah, I mean, I think For me, it was sort of, there was no other option, right? I keep in mind, even after spending a year kind of working in this, what I will call a back office role, I was still only 20 and a half or something, and had like almost no directly applicable finance experience, right? So I think for me, it was sort of do this or, and I was, not anywhere. I mean, I was in North Florida. So I think for me, it was sort of the only path in.
But was banking like the goal? Was it like, oh, I know I want to do
yeah,
banking?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I actually found the site. I found this site during my less industrious time in this back office role, and that
Trying to figure out how to get out.
Yes,
I think there's
exactly.
a thread like how to get out of back office. There's some really funny, famous thread about like back office where like careers go to die or something like that. But yeah, no hate to the back office people. I think it can be a good career if you want something more chill and to do side projects as well and have a life. But okay, so you're in the back office. You're thinking, I want more. I'm gonna go get this MSF, and you figure MSF is decent because hey, you looked at some placement stats and you thought they actually are placing some kids into banking, or did you not even think that far ahead?
No, I mean that's the way I titrated it. I mean, I did spend some time on a TNA site, so shout out to him. Looked through that stuff. I think for me, it also, I looked at it as, like I was really proactive. So I was able to like land a internship at a large, fixed income, like asset management shop that was in the local market where my MSF was, sort of in advance of arriving. So I basically, like the minute I got accepted, started spamming out my resume with that heading on it. And so like I felt like I had already moved up in the world by having that internship.
You had the internship. You knew you were going to get you knew you were going to get the MSF. So can you talk to me a little bit about that? About you say you're spamming everybody in the area. So you would, as soon as you got accepted, you put expected graduation date 2000 whatever it was 14 or whatever, and then you basically said. Like you started reaching out to people saying, hey, I'd love to do an internship. When? So explain to me the timing. So you get onto campus, what, September?
Yeah. So I think we had some they call them pre-courses that we had to do starting in July.
Yep.
But I took off from my gig before that in like May. So I was like ready to go and sending out, and I was, doing the thing where I was happy to get coffee, meet, do whatever I needed to do. And I was lucky to find this shop, which was, had a big segment of WashU alumni at it. And so like at that point, right, like I'd been a little on the fence about, because like most MSF, it's an expensive degree. But at that point, like I'd sort of already seen the lift from the brand. And so I was pretty convinced.
Got it. So you had the internship. It would have been funny if you got that internship then pulled out of the MSF just to save yourself the money. It's a new hack. It's a new hack.
That would have been an awkward conversation with service.
No, yes, for sure. So, okay, you get the internship. Is that internship like before or during your MSF, or is it right after? Is it considered to be like right after and then hopefully it turns into full time?
Yeah, it was concurrent. So I actually started at my first day was actually before I like actually stepped into my first class session.
Got it.
So they took a chance on me, but it was great. And I learned a ton actually.
Why do you think you did that? Like, who did you connect with in the sense of like, was it just one of these cold email, coffee chat people? You went there and you just started meeting with people, right? So was it one of these people you just met randomly, or was it kind of through a friend of a friend?
Yeah, it was very much random. It was one of those things where I think like the story was weird enough to them that they took the coffee, and then I sort of pitched them on my ability to be self-starter. Like, look, I did this undergraduate thing in 2 years. I've since gotten, studied on my own and got some brokerage licenses, sort of on my own time.
Yep.
I have a real passion for this, and you won't have to hold my hand. I can actually be valuable to you. So
Great.
that was the pitch.
Did you think you were valuable to them? Being honest. looking back?
No, I think I did some necessary work. I don't think it's
It wasn't.
like looking back.
It wasn't a game
Go
changing.
ahead.
It wasn't a game changing
No.
internship for them.
No, I did not. I did not change the course of that whole ship. That is not the case.
Okay, so talk to me a little bit about. So you're getting the MSF. You're going to classes. You're doing an internship, and you're recruiting now for like your full time gig, all at once.
Exactly. Yeah.
So is it crazy?
It was a stressful period.
Okay. So tell me about the recruiting for banking out of the MSF, because I haven't had a guest on here talk to me about that, and I'd be curious. I know what it's like at MBA programs, but I've heard a mixed bag. I've heard that people who go to the MSF that are, obviously networking really hard, actually have some decent success, especially if they have no visa issues, whereas international students tend to struggle a lot more. Any thoughts on that? And then, yeah, just if you could dive right into the whole IB recruiting from an MSF, that'd be great.
Yeah. So I think high level, the biggest thing that you touched on that I would note is the visa status is like probably the easiest filter. Like if you wanted to separate out the kids that were successful from the ones that were not, like that's the number one indicator. I think everyone had to network maybe harder than you would in either undergrad or MBA. I always like jokingly referred to our program as like a bastard child, where like the MBA guys didn't want you taking their OCR, and grad students didn't really want you doing that either. So I think there was on average a lot more legwork involved. To me, I think that's almost always the case anyway, right? Because even if you're at like one of these really good target programs, like you still have to put in the work to get the outcomes that are going to seem relative to what everyone else is doing really exciting.
Right.
So I think that's a big part of it. And again, I think the other thing that I worked really hard to capitalize on was moving fast. Again, that's sort of why I kind of pulled forward this whole internship thing in a kind of maniac way, was because I wanted to have that on my resume with enough time that like I could say, yeah, I've been there. You can call. I can give you some names, someone to call.
And would that be like if you started in June, or do you start in June? That was a guess, but you started in June at this place.
Yeah, June.
So you start there, then you have probably a few months before. I mean, were banks actually coming on campus for the MSF, or you had to kind of just try and get whatever the MBAs were getting? Like, how did that work?
So we obviously had access to the same kind of like OCR website,
right,
and some limited kind of on-campus stuff. Obviously WashU is in St. Louis, so we had some people come in from Stiefel, that sort of thing. It's not like Goldman wasn't flying out to meet with the MSF students for sure.
Yeah.
But so again, I think at that point, like the things I focused on, and this is what I would really, anyone who's focused on, especially banking out of an MSF program, the things I would focus on are the number one reason why people should get an MSF if they're going into banking is because they don't have good internship experience, right? So that's the first thing to fix. The second thing to do is I really advise people, even if you felt like you could kind of place out of some of these prep work classes that I'm going to call them. So these are like intro to accounting, some other kind of just basic, make sure that you can balance the balance sheet kind of classes. Take those even if you nominally qualify not to. They should be easy A's. It's over the summer. You're only going to be taking a couple of classes. So I went in with a 4.0 on my resume, showing the ability to get an internship, and that was the way I was perceived, as opposed to a lot of people who by the time August rolled around had nothing.
Wait, so how were you able to put a 4.0 on your resume? If you were, when did the recruiting start? Like second semester? You talking about like when you were recruiting?
We had these mini classes, right?
Okay.
What I'm calling the prep work, right? So,
yep.
And again, they're relevant classes. I mean, it was all accounting and finance.
This is great. So you take those, you get an A, and you put 4.0 on your GPA on your MSF, so it looks impressive.
Yeah, and exactly. And then like the true fall courses
smart.
didn't even start till September, so I didn't really have to worry about jeopardizing, my coursework when I was recruiting.
And so when was Stiefel coming on campus? Around September, October?
think it was like right at the end of August, early September.
Oh, it's early.
So it was
early. Wow.
so yeah, it was a little early, because they were local, right?
Yeah.
And then I had more people filter in. We had more people filter in. Sort of a lot of like BMO. I remember. I remember some SunTrust people. At least like they would at least have one guy that came in and talked to us. And so that was probably my big focus for those. I mean, it was a real sprint for that 1.5 months.
Yeah, and the MSF, they're still expecting you to come in as an analyst, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the pitch, I had to make was like, yeah, I don't maybe have, maybe this doesn't fit the mold as well, but like, look at all these things I've done, right? So I made a big pitch about like basically work ethic and ability to be efficient under pressure.
Which is what matters,
was
man,
sort of the
crux. I mean.
Yeah, exactly. Which is, and people appreciated that.
Yeah. As long as you're like, show them that you're willing to be a workhorse and you have a baseline level of like intelligence that they're looking for, which I think it was really smart to kind of get those easy classes in quickly, so you could even put that on your resume, because then you're showing a couple kind of like standout things on your resume, the quick undergrad, like 20 months, which is kind of like a wow. And then the 4.0, it's like another like, okay, check that intelligence box, you know what I mean? And then just, you probably had your pitch down. So it doesn't surprise me that you landed where you did. So, okay, so it sounds like did you land a lot of first round interviews outside of OCR? What else happened?
Yeah, so I managed to I actually like kind of found out during this process that I had my uncle's wife, now actually ex-wife, it was the CFO of a large organic foods company based in Colorado.
Okay.
And she had some sort of what I would call she had some, I'll call warm handoffs she could do for me. It wasn't like she was not like a core client for these investment banks. I think she maybe had some like revolvers and stuff, but it wasn't like she had done some M&A transactions.
Right.
But it was enough. It was enough to get people to look at my resume.
Right.
And so that juiced the process a little bit for me too.
And was that at the same kind of set of banks that had come on to campus, or was that a set of other banks?
I got a couple of like, I remember I got into some like first rounds with some elite boutiques, but like to be candid, I would not be shocked if the answer was just, I mean, keep in mind at this point I'd done econ undergrad, so it maybe had like one financial accounting class.
So did you get blown out of the water with the technicals? Be honest.
Oh, yeah, no, I did. Like, I'd had the guides and I'd gone through them, but it was one of those things where I think, especially because I was, sort of pushing this narrative hard of, I'm a grad student and I'm going to know all these things.
You must have gotten fried on some of those.
Yeah.
That's tough, man.
I got totally blown out of the water.
Well, that's the tough part, man, because like you're trying to play that balance of saying, hey, I have a master's in finance, and they're like, oh yeah, like what about this? And you're like, oh shit, that's actually really complicated. Okay, well that's fair. So you got blown out of some elite boutiques because they were like, who does this kid think he is? Because you were telling this story, whatever. It seemed to have worked well enough. You landed on your feet. You got a banking job. Mission accomplished, right? And tell me a little bit about that. Like, so what was that transition like? And what was your perspective?
Yeah, I think, so, and this is going to sound maybe pretty lame to like avid readers on the site, but I think that the biggest thing I observed very quickly after starting was the variability between groups, especially when you're outside of like the really top banks, right? Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is like, there were groups that my peers got placed into that could be good groups, not like I'm not talking about like maybe like an asset-based lending group or something that's maybe always a little bit off spec for people that want to do like true standard investment banking. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about like consumer and retail, where there was just, I think there was maybe like one M&A transaction done by that group the whole time I was there, right?
Got it.
And so it's like, I think that's probably the biggest thing I would emphasize to people that are going to like a middle market bank, especially, is just kind of know the group you're going into and have like from day one start thinking about what.
Did you know that? Did you have leverage going in of kind of trying to direct yourself into the quote right group or the group with the most active transaction or the most live deals?
So I'm going to be candid because, that's what we've been
doing.
That's I really wanted, I was pretty dead set on, I didn't have a particular industry I was interested in at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So for me going in, it was, I was all about the M&A and the leverage finance groups.
Yep.
Didn't land there, right? Again, we could talk about, I was coming from a university that, even though this was a middle market bank, I was like the only one in my class from the university I was coming into.
Right.
So it wasn't necessarily, didn't have like the brand inside these groups to really edge out any favorites. But did land in a sponsors group, right?
Yep.
And that was exciting. And I think the thing that I focused on, and this is part of what I mean about sort of once you land thinking about how to pitch your experience, was, when you're in a coverage group, that's a financial sponsors group, that's a coverage group, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get really one valuable thing out of that, right? And that is you get to spend a lot of face time with senior level private equity guys, and you get to understand sort of what I'm going to call the business side of PE,
yep,
as opposed to the transaction side of PE.
Mm-hmm.
And so I immediately honed in on that, and started thinking about how that could be, effectively parlayed for whatever step was coming next, right? Which is why I landed in a kind of fund-to-fund LP type, LP investing situation after that.
So
right?
How long at this middle market bank did it take you to kind of like figure out that, hey, this is actually a decent group to be in because you were getting exposure to these private equity clients, and what made you did you know like IBPE was kind of what you wanted to do? Were you brainwashed by Wall Street Oasis early on of like, this is the path I hope not. I hope that's not the answer. But, is that something where you had kind of already determined before going into banking, or like you were so just set on banking, you got it, and then it was just like you lifted your head up?
Yeah, so I was focused on the banking. Like my reason for going into banking was, I think, kind of the normal one, which is I knew I needed skills, right? I liked finance, knew I needed skills. And there was sort of a broad spectrum of things that could have probably made me happy. In fact, that's the thing I was most interested in at the time, which I think is consistent with where I wound up now, is I was really interested in either doing kind of early stage venture stuff in healthcare or joining a startup. Like I had a buddy that co-founded a brain computer interface business, and like I was super interested in going to work on that, right?
Yep.
So this is what I was like. So I land day one. I don't get healthcare. I don't get M&A. I don't get less than. And so the path from like financial sponsors, which is like later stage PE guys, right?
Right.
To that does not look obvious.
Yeah.
So what I did was, this again comes back to sort of the pragmatic approach I consistently try to take, and I'd recommend people that are young try and take too. Was I just said, okay, I kind of have these assets, right? The assets I have are, like, I had an early interaction where, like, one of my bosses was running late for a kind of a check-in meeting with a middle market PE firm, and the guys in the room, except for me, were all from this firm, and they were all like ex-KKR, right?
Yeah.
So I sort of had to make small talk with these guys and talk with them, and I didn't know anything, right? I'd kind of just gotten through the first 3 months, I was barely on the desk, right?
What did you talk about? Sports or like the weather? I mean, what did you even bring up? That would be like a deer in the headlights for a lot of people, I think. I think the funny thing that we got to talk about was, because this was down in Atlanta, right? Mm-hmm.
Is the funny thing we got to talk about was one of the guys had almost been like ticketed for jaywalking, and he was so taken aback by the fact that you could still get ticketed for that, right? So we spent, and I was new to Atlanta, like I'd been again in Atlanta for maybe 3 or 4 months. So I think we spent about 10 minutes just sort of riffing about the South and how weird that probably is if you're coming from New York City.
Yeah, or Boston. Yeah, I would always run across people run across the street all the time and almost get hit. But yeah, anyways. So
Yeah.
okay, so it's just small
so
talk.
I told him if you think Atlanta's weird, wait till you get to North Florida. I can tell you some stories. So it was like I said, it was a fun conversation.
Cool. Okay. So you're there. You're kind of interacting with clients. It's kind of interesting. You're doing some actual live deals, I assume.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so yeah, tell me kind of what kind of opened up that next opportunity for you. Kind of what led you to that, and when did you start looking, or did it kind of just fall into place at a certain time?
Yeah. So I would say the one piece that I left out. So as far as like the setup for how I got the job, I think the other thing that I should really stress.
Yep.
For the young, either about to be bankers or first years, is if you sort of keep your head down, and even if you're like in a group like, let's say like mine, right, where maybe you don't feel like you're getting the level of like exposure to certain products or whatever. That you dreamed of, when you were studying for your interviews. The key is to like have a really good attitude about it, and build relationships with the senior guys in your group. They've almost always like been in the group for a while. And if you really say, hey, look, I've demonstrated I can do what I need to do as an analyst for this group. I'd like to take on some projects. Like for me, it was doing some sell-side M&A stuff.
Oh, so you did do that.
Right?
You did go to your seniors and actually get to do some sell-side M&A, even though you weren't in that group. You eventually had the clout,
exactly.
like after what, a year or so, or like 9 months? What did you feel like that was a good time?
I waited till I was through my first review, right? So I basically waited for them to say to me,
"You're doing great.
You're doing everything you need to do, firing all cylinders." And I said, "That's great. I think I can do more. Here's what it is." Right?
Yeah.
Was the sort of the bullet points.
Great.
And again, it wouldn't have worked if I actually just been doing my job, and actually, like if I had just done my job and hadn't gone out of my way to like make friends with those guys.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would have been a different conversation.
Yeah, no, for sure. So they kind of felt like, okay, well, yeah, I guess we can throw you a bone over here and get you something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was one of those things, which is
Exactly.
good, which is actually really smart, because then you at least get that on your resume, and so it makes you more well-rounded. Okay, so tell me, did that help getting that experience for the next jump, or let's go there.
It did because it did because number one, it just gave me a lot of confidence, right? In the sense that like I did it, I knew I could handle it at that point, so I was like less worried that later on down, like I knew I would never be as solid as somebody who, lived and breathed M&A for, years.
Yeah.
But at least I knew I could handle it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was maybe the most important thing. And then I sort of looked around at what my options were, thought about what my priorities were, and the big two were I really would like to make it to the my options were basically try to break to the buy side, lateral to a different bank, lateral to a different group in my own bank, right?
Yep.
Out of the three, I was most focused on the buy side, but maybe even the more important filter was really wanted to make it up to New York, right? I knew that's a big indicator for a lot of people, and so and I was again sort of leveraging these relationships I had built. I was working.
When you say it's a big indicator for a lot of people, what do you mean by that? Like it just looks good if you're in New York?
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. And like I've now been in the position where I worked in New York for 2 years, and I've now moved to the Midwest,
Mm-hmm.
and I am in the middle of sort of talking through some. I talked with some recruiters about potential jobs both on the West Coast and the East Coast, and every single one of them says, well, you're not here. Oh, but I see you did that, right? And it is almost 100% of the time it comes up. So again, I'm not saying you couldn't make it work without it.
You have some ties back
like,
to New York, which really helps you get back there if you want to, is the point.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
It was a de-risking move for me.
Yeah, no, for sure, because it's the biggest market for jobs and whatever. So it's always having those couple of years there is smart. Okay. So yeah, sorry, continue. So you kind of this job. So go ahead.
Yeah. So I sort of cast a broad net, and I'll focus on where I was successful, right, which was this large fund of funds, right, and there a lot of my pitch was around a couple of things, right? Number one, it's kind of the same stick I'd been using, right? Of smart guy, look, I can work hard under pressure. Number two was this bit about the big component of understanding how fund of funds work. There's a lot of overlap with covering financial sponsors, right? You have coverage over these investment managers.
Mm-hmm.
You need to think about things like fundraising, AUM, stability of the operating company, right? So again, I was emphasizing sort of I have some broad familiarity with a lot of these issues, which also affect your business. And by the way, I've got can do the modeling, right? And I have this MSF, and I took some kind of high level stats classes. So if you need me to do some fancy stuff in Excel or in like MATLAB, that's within my purview as well, right?
Mm-hmm. I'm sure they like to hear
that. So
that.
again, it was sort of
like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was sort of cobbling together like this whole host of things that if I think back to that 18 or 19-year-old kid that thought he had the world figured out and was going to go to law school, it was sort of a weird, clunky way to get there, but it made it work.
I think an important part about that to highlight is you're very specific about how your experience previously would translate to direct value for that specific firm. I think so many people get into I'm a hard worker, I'm this, and I'll be good for me, and I think I'll be great, and they don't really focus on what's the specific things that are translatable that you're going to bring day one. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think and this is something I actually I wanted to emphasize when I was thinking about prepping for this call is, it's sort of fine to play the numbers game early in your career. But you got to segment out what you view as high value opportunities. And for those, it's super important to come in with a really strong idea of what you bring to the table that can add value day one, right? And be able to articulate where the gaps are that you have, right? I've actually sometimes had more success being able to clearly articulate hey, by the way, here's the one piece of what I would assume, you guys really need that I'm going to have to develop on, right? Because I think
that's great. Yeah, but it's showing self-awareness that a lot of people don't do. They instead of overselling, you say, I know I need this, but I have all these other things too, but I'm ready, and so it almost makes it more believable. It's like seeing a 4.2 star rating instead of seeing all 5-star ratings. The 4.2 almost makes you buy more and believe it more.
Yeah, and especially if you couch it in by the way, this is one of the reasons why I'm really excited to join your firm.
Yeah.
It's because I know I have this area I haven't had a lot of exposure to, and I'm excited to grow that, right?
Yeah.
And that way it almost repositions it as a way to combat sort of any kind of flight risk signaling that happens a lot in finance.
Talk to me about that. What do you mean? I didn't mean that last flight risk. Why would saying flight risk, meaning you're saying there's a lot of stuff I actually want to learn at your specific company, so I'm less of a flight risk. So you kind of minimize that potential concern. Got it.
Exactly.
Yep, that makes sense.
You're already you're explaining why you want to work for them in a way that doesn't sound like canned. Got it.
Okay. So tell me about this new role, and what was it like?
Yeah. So it was super interesting. I mean, I got a little lucky. The limited amount of interactions I've had with people that at other fund of funds, it sounds like it might have been a little different. We were sort of one of the top fund of funds, if you will, by performance and by asset size. So this was $20 billion fund, which is a lot. And so there were probably, so I got lucky just by, number one, going to a kind of a top pedigree institution that, so lots of smart people, a lot of people that I could learn from. So that was exciting. Again, sort of referencing back to this experience I had in sponsors, even if you're not doing a lot of the direct hand-to-hand combat, you're still getting the opportunity to meet with some of the smartest people in the financial world.
But did you feel at this point you might get pigeonholed into fund of funds? Because I think that's a big fear a lot of people have when they go to fund of funds. Is
Oh, it was absolutely a fear I had. Yeah.
So you knew that going in. You're like, this could be a problem later on. You knew that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the way I framed it to myself, right, was number one, I was sort of in this group where I'd been able to kind of negotiate my way into some one-off transactions, and that was great. But still was not gonna stack up against, somebody who'd been doing it all the time, right? So I wasn't going to be able to make the I'm a technical wizard pitch,
right.
Just based on my existing banking group, right? And there's a lot of, so it wasn't really a loss as far as developing my technical chops. I was moving to a better market, and two,
you're getting to New York.
Like
you're getting to New York. Your opportunities are unlimited. You'll at least be able to network better with people there. That's probably the thought process. I'm guessing that was some of the thought process. But then specifically, like when you said you were going to get some technical, like did you feel like the work you were going to get there was actually, I mean, you're not really analyzing deals as much as you're analyzing the funds themselves, right? When you're at the fund.
So this is another part. This is so, I think in every one of these stories, there's a big luck component.
Yeah.
And this is probably one of the biggest sources of luck I had this whole way along. The fund of funds I was at had some pretty large private equity co-investments that I got staffed on. So I got to be sort of a silent board observer for a large multi-billion-dollar natural gas company, which we had a half a $500 million slug into.
Wow.
So like big exposure. They were doing tons of M&A by nature of their industry. So even if it wasn't maybe as granular as you would see for like a true like PE fund, I was still evaluating these transactions. Similarly, I got staffed on a big like music publishing rights company.
Were you actually building LBOs and were you building LBOs and like putting actual investment committee memos together for them, or?
So I would say it was more like I was putting together memos. I don't think like we usually had some kind of basic operating models.
Yep.
It was sort of my job to sort of kind of sensitize and diligence the transaction. But like a lot of the calls, like a lot of the what I would call like the so maybe not as tough on the technicals, but still going through a lot of the same steps as far as understanding the strategic rationale.
I mean, that's huge, man, just to have that experience, just because, at a fund of funds, I don't think that's commonplace, right? If there's a decent
not at all.
If there's a decent co-investment arm, I guess, yes, you can get that exposure, especially if you, and anybody who does go into fund of funds that has that, hey, if it's a good move for you, then do it. But just going in eyes wide open, knowing that, it can pigeonhole you a little bit if you don't get that type of experience.
That's absolutely right. And again, I think I would, and I can say from experience, like even, so even at this fund, right, where I was around a lot of bright people from, bulge bracket banks, or like, trading desks at bulge bracket banks. I think I saw maybe one exit to a hedge fund the whole time I was there.
Right.
I think like one guy maybe made it to like maybe a seeding fund as well, but like the yield was not strong.
So where were people going? Like MBAs and stuff?
A lot of MBAs, and it was also a partner track role. So I think, and again, probably one other thing I should flag as a part of the differences that made the calculus work in my case is compensation was really strong at this fund of funds relative to most. Like I was making much more than I had been in banking. So I think they tried to create, they tried to work pretty, I think they sort of knew that they could, it would be hard for them to make the exit kind of based argument for joining their firm. So they tried to really entice you with
monetary
quality of life stuff.
Do you mind sharing specifically what it was like, what your comp was like coming out of the MSF to your middle market bank, and then specifically at this fund of funds? And you can give ranges if you're not comfortable giving exact.
Yeah. So I was in like the 120 to 150 range as a first year analyst, which was pretty good, especially for not in the New York market. At the fund of funds, I would say I'm going to say first year analysts brought in between 215 and 250. Yeah,
it's impressive.
So
wow, that's a lot
for a fund of funds. That's probably at least top decile, right? So I think again, anyone who's listening to this and
don't expect that. Don't expect
that. Yeah. Not market for sure.
Cool. Okay, so now that makes sense. They're a top fund of funds. They want to attract good talent, so they're paying for it. And so, okay. And so you're there. Yeah, continue. So you're getting that co-investment experience, and then what?
So then, and this is again where maybe a big part of the emphasis I want to have for this is that it's sort of always a winding road. A couple of things happened. So number one, we were successful in exiting several of these co-investments, which was great. We made a lot of money, and that was awesome. But it didn't look like that program was going to be continued, especially not at the same scope, right? And so I sort of already had some early conversations with people about, like, not necessarily my future, but like me expressing some concern because this was the stuff that I really liked, right?
Yeah.
So that was probably in like just after the end of my first year. And then fast forward about another 5 months, unfortunately, my mom got diagnosed with cancer, right, which was horrific and really stressful, and she's still down in Florida. And so the partners, who, again, stand-up guys, approached me and basically say, like, look, you definitely need to take some time off, right? We appreciate that. And we will kind of make you an offer. You can either take a paid leave of absence for 3 months, right? Come back, no harm done. You're still on track to get the bonus you're on track to get. Or we can just pay you out through the end of the year, right? If you think that maybe this is not what you want to do forever, right? So we'll give you, 6 months of runway to go figure out, your stuff in your personal life, and we'll give you a reference wherever you want to go, right? And you'll have time to recruit.
How did you feel about that when they said that to you? What did you think? What was your impression of that? I'm curious.
To me, I was just really impressed, right? I think these are people who, they spent their career doing the stuff that maybe I was not, I think a little bit more artfully than this, but, basically saying, nah, I don't want to do this forever. Right.
Right.
So I think for them to respond, so number one, I think just the offer of 3 months paid leave, for a junior employee, I think that's always pretty stand up. I think especially for them to recognize, like, look, we want to do right by you, and we want to be like fair and honest brokers. So if you'd rather just sort of, go try and do something else, well, we're going to support you. And they really did that. A lot of people will say that. I think it was unusual that not only did they kind of offer up the reference, which I think would have been kind of par for the course, they sort of put the money where their mouth was too.
In the sense, like, when you needed a reference, they stepped up, kind of thing.
Yeah, and again, I think they it was important to them that all their ex-employees be referenceable. So I think that was part of it too. But I think they were just like real human beings. Like, here's a young kid going through this thing. He doesn't necessarily know how this is gonna end. So, like, let's not make him try to pick between like come back and be miserable, right? They didn't
like rushing back or whatever. If you wanted more time to spend with your mom,
you should be focused on this stuff with his mom, right?
Yeah. So tell me, what did you decide? Did you go down to Florida? Did you take the paid leave, the 3 months, the 6 months? What was the decision, and what was kind of your thought process in that?
Yeah. So my logic was. So I think I was going to go down to Florida for at least the 3 months, no matter what, right?
Yep.
I thought about it, gave it some thought, and the logic from my end was, it would be really disingenuous to get that kind of an offer, take it, and come back if I wasn't absolutely sure this is, like, I wasn't trying to make partner at this firm, right? Like, if that wasn't my end goal,
right?
That felt super unsavory to me, to take that offer and then, like, just keep recruiting, right? Like, these people are trying to do me a solid.
Got it.
And so I should either sign up for the long haul or kind of get out.
Did you feel a little pressure from that, like that offer, the fact that, like, it was almost forcing your hand to make that decision prematurely? Like, in the sense of, like, you could have left after taking that offer, but it just would have looked bad?
Yeah, to me, I had already, like, again...
you had already started recruiting, it sounds like, so...
I started thinking about, I definitely had some like very preliminary conversations. And again, I'm going to loop it back to, years prior, but right when I kind of got into this, I really had these visions of either doing kind of VC or being some kind of like early stage company CFO, right?
Right.
I was going to leverage all that banking experience that I didn't really get, to do that. Right. So to me, I I was in the mindset of this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to really just like go and pursue this like full steam ahead, not necessarily be distracted by working in this environment and all this other stuff. So I'm gonna go home. My mom luckily made a really full recovery.
Thank God.
So then yeah, exactly. And so at that point, started sending out the resume and having calls, and like a month and a half later was working at a venture capital firm.
That's crazy. So so you had kind of already started that process. Was it something where when you went home, was it something that like you continued down there, and like, or was it already kind of, you had already like the final rounds teed up? Like, what was the amount of work you had to do going home with that stress of being with your mother and that whole thing in your family and helping out there? Like,
so I would say I took a full month of doing nothing. I really tried. I really, like, I didn't know how this thing was going to turn out.
Right.
And I just told people that pretty candidly. And, that was a personal choice on my part.
Yep.
And it just had to do with, I didn't want to be like the jerk running around on the phone trying to hold interviews while everyone else is like, busing people to and from hospitals. Like that didn't feel right to me.
Yep. No, that's fair. And so you did the right thing. You stood, and then like you kind of started getting going again once things, you put in some helped your mom a little bit, and helped your family, and then.
And I should be clear, when I said a month and a half, I meant after. Like I spent a little more than a month down in Florida, and like for that I was like just totally down there, and like, basically like I maybe checked email or something, but like I basically did.
Of course,
little or nothing on the recruiting front.
Yeah.
And so then I came back up to New York, came back up to my apartment.
Oh, you did? Okay, you came back. Okay.
And the month and a half is from like that point.
Got it. And so at that point you had just taken the 6 months, basically. You had a good amount of runway.
Yeah. So I think that was important, right? Especially because I was paying New York City rent and all that stuff. So I think being like incomeless would have been painful.
Did you have roommates at that point or no?
I was splitting rent with my then girlfriend, now fiance. So
congrats.
It was
doable.
Yeah. So like it was doable, and I made it work. And again, it was base and bonus, so it wasn't like it wasn't. The financial pressure was not that great. I mean, you always worry about like, what if I get to the end of 6 months and don't have anything?
Right.
But I think there was no real acute pressure on that front.
Got it. So so tell me a little bit about that whole recruiting process and how you ended up where you're at.
Yeah, I think so. A couple things helped me make that transition, because I will be honest with you, of all the sort of difficult recruiting hoops I've had to jump through, the one to get into VC was easily the worst. There's just not that many opportunities.
Yep.
And like the good ones are really hotly contested, and the bad ones are like often like really bad in the sense of like low pay, and maybe you're not doing stuff that even kind of feels like VC.
They call it a VC analyst. You're just an admin, a glorified admin or something.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Okay. Yep.
So like I said, and it's a great starting point, and no offense to anyone who's going to make that work for them down the road. But at this point, I was 4 years into my career. I did not want to. I knew I wouldn't be happy if I went into a role and was just kind of like shuffling papers around.
For sure.
So it was a painful process, and I'll be candid about the fact that I was sort of dual tracking, like VC was sort of the end all be all, but I was actively trying to hit up startups and say like, look, I can do, maybe you need like strategic finance associate, like maybe there's something we can make happen here, right?
Dude, you should have been in touch with me at the time. Well, I don't think we had the talent Oasis then, but we have a lot of strategic finance associates at startups. We have a lot of those roles.
Yeah. I mean, that can be a good role, and maybe we'll talk more about this once I get down to, once we get kind of through the history.
Yeah.
So I was sort of dual tracking, right? And I'll be candid about the fact that like my hit rate was, even like first rounds for VC was like abysmally low. It was just difficult. I didn't have any of the right kind of hallmarks of it's not like I'm was some wizard coder. It wasn't like I had a PhD. And it wasn't even like I'd spent a lot of time on the like early stage stuff.
Oh, I
when
could
was
tell
in
you,
banking.
you wouldn't make the cut based on the fact that you were a banker and then fund of funds. Like immediately, a lot of VC funds will be like, no,
Yeah,
they have to
we're,
show startup. They have to be an accelerator or a startup founder or, like you said, PhD or some crazy, whatever. So like, yeah, you being a banker is almost like a negative. It can be a negative for people who are like aren't looking for those finance oriented people. They want the people who are like all about startups and that whole ecosystem. It's different.
Yeah. And even if, and again, just trying to make this valuable for the listeners. The other thing I would say is like, even if you have banking experience, don't like that. That should not be
your focus.
Like, that should not be what you. Yeah, that should not be what you like lay out front and center during the interview, right? Like it should basically be a way of you, like that should be some faint signaling about work ethic, but don't try to like connect that to capital raising process and VC land because it's not the same 90 times out of 10.
Yeah.
So I was able to leverage basically my WashU network here. So that was a big component of it.
Mm-hmm.
I was also lucky that the place that I landed, we have a pretty flexible mandate. So while I would say something like 80 to 90% of our portfolio is maybe 90, let's say 70 to 80% of our portfolio
mm-hmm.
is like Series C or earlier. We have this weird thing where we do a little bit of like co-investing alongside like growth equity
mm-hmm.
style private equity shops. So I think there was maybe more relevance for my banking background than you would have seen at a typical VC firm.
Yep.
And so that was that helped me get in the door. There was a lot of WashU connectivity at the firm, so that helped a lot. And then sort of my thesis, I had been genuinely targeting healthcare, and I think having a personal story around why I understood sort of the brokenness of our healthcare system currently, given the recent experience with my mom at the time, helped a lot.
Yeah, for sure, because you could speak to it, personal experience, and it connected. Yeah.
And so I had some passion, and so that I think kind of pushed things over the top for me.
Cool, man. So what's next for you? What's the plan? So you've been doing investments there you've been there for about 1.5 years, right? And so you've been doing investments. How many have you done? Mostly, it sounds like mostly healthcare, right? And so have you enjoyed it?
So I've enjoyed it. It's been actually an awesome opportunity. I've been lucky to work at a place where I think, there's like being a VC associate can mean a lot of things. Some places it means like you're at the desk on your phone, kind of cold calling CEOs
mm-hmm.
all day. And some places it means like you basically maybe write some memos and build a liquidation model or a return model. In some places it means like you're really there through the thick and thin of it. I'm lucky enough to be in the third bucket, so have actively worked on some sourcing, have done some processing of new opportunities at the initial stage on my own, have ran as a part of a 2-person team through 3 completed transactions and several that we got kind of close to, and have a couple live right now. So lucky that I was sort of at a lean shop where we're all kind of expected to pitch in on everything, and so have been able to kind of have a first row seat for a lot of the stuff that goes on behind the scenes as far as in the boardroom, positioning with potential syndicate partners, all that stuff. So experience has been great. It's structured as a 2 to 3 year and out program.
Yep.
So I am sort of starting to have the early inklings about what's next for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think probably most attractive to me would be to go to one of 2 places. Kind of like a name brand VC shop would be great, maybe with something that does healthcare plus some like enterprise tech. That's
mm-hmm.
a space that I find super interesting, and I think there are there's a case to be like a lot of the deals I've been working on here have been IT, and so whether your enterprise is a kind of typical enterprise or a hospital, there's some applicability to what I've been doing on the IT side. That would be true if it was a non-healthcare organization.
Yep.
So I think that would be exciting. I think equally exciting if I could find the right role, and finding the right roles in this particular area is tough. But like a really like a senior-ish kind of operating role. So something like an actual value add chief of staff. You know,
strategic
maybe
finance, VP or something.
A product manager, if it was the right kind of startup.
Or like pre-Series A or Series A or earlier, or something like that.
Yeah, somewhere. Yeah, because I think later than that, I don't think even now I have the experience to really be value add in that kind of role.
Yep.
But somewhere where I could sort of wear a lot of hats. You know, obviously there's some things I can speak to directly as far as narrative crafting and fundraising, where I could bring value day one, but I haven't gotten to have a whole lot of operating exposure in my time. And so I think it'd be pretty cool to, you know, build some real true domain expertise from the inside.
For sure, man. That's cool. One thing before we wrap it up, it's gone longer than most, but I'd love to hear any. No, it's good. I love it. Anything specifically, any one piece of advice you would have given your younger self or to the listeners that you want to kind of leave them with? If you can look back on your career and say, hey, you should have done this, or do you feel like all your steps were the right ones?
Yeah, so maybe I'll two quick things. One specific to my journey, and then one's like the piece of advice that I think is least frequently given to people that are sort of playing the recruiting game. As far as my personal story goes, I think the key is I wish I had just like loosened up and relaxed a lot of it. Like it came through pretty early on in this call, but like the rushing through undergrad, and just sort of this constant urgency and what's next. That's very much a young man's game, and you'll be like shocked most people will be shocked at how quickly your stamina for that kind of runs out. And so you need to like what you're doing right now, and so focus on like make sure that's true first, and then start thinking about the next step.
Got it.
And then I think that the piece of information that I try to pass on to people that I think is valuable for almost anyone that's doing recruiting is to sort of pace yourself. And what I mean by that is like I always tried to pick like a dedicated time during the day, like usually before work if I was working, and maybe like only an hour and a half to do recruiting related like outbound or communication. You know, obviously interviews you kind of have to schedule as you can, but to keep it to just that. And the main reasons for that are sort of a stamina argument, and then also like you always learn a ton during these recruitment cycles, regardless of how experienced you are. Like your narrative will have changed since the last time you did this.
Yeah.
And so your ability to craft that narrative requires there being kind of gaps between calls. Like if you're just trying to do calls and
you get better,
off, right?
You get better as you go. It's just natural, like right, like your first 5 interviews you haven't recruited in 2 years. You're a little rusty, right?
And the problem is if you spam out 100 things
and it's like the top 100 interviews, and it's the top 100 ones that your only universe, then you waste it, right? Yeah, when you're not as polished.
Yeah,
I think that's great advice.
Yep.
Pace yourself, polish yourself as you go, ideally before you're into the big ones that matter the most. But cool, man. Well, thanks so much, and thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, patrick@wallstreetoasis.com. And until next time.